Hey there. Um, I want you to play this video that I was watching, about 15 minutes of it, um, concerning the Quran, and it was some interesting stuff on there. I'll tell you what. Um, just listen to the first 15 minutes of it. It's about 4 o'clock in the morning. It's always late whenever I get on, isn't it? Anyway, it's pretty interesting because there's things we didn't know, where some people might not know too much because they don't want to share this kind of stuff. It's just something that's very controversial. Don't want to accept Muslims and stuff like that. Don't want to offend them, I guess, or something like that. So anyway, but the truth has to be known. The truth has to be said. And there's some very interesting facts about the Quran as opposed to the Bible. So, what about Muhammad? How long did he live? What was his influence on the Quran? And when did he write it? And things like that. That's some things we need to really be asking ourselves. So, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hopefully you can hear it, but I'm gonna let this play out for like 15 minutes. It's called Allah and Muhammad. It had nothing to do with the Quran or Islam. Islam is founded on lies and deception. And this is called The Endless Love of Jesus Ministries. It's on YouTube. I think it's called, let's see here. But anyway, that's the channel name, The Endless Love of Jesus Ministries. Okay. So, I'm going to let it play out here a little bit.
We're going to do something different tonight. We're going to be looking at material that will be quite damaging to Islam, and that's the whole intention. I make no apologies for that. I've spent 30 years confronting Islam, 20 years in London, doing it weekly at a place called Speaker's Corner. And one of the things that comes up over and over again is the problem concerning Muhammad and the Quran. Those are really the two pillars of Islam. Islam falls if the Quran is not true. Islam falls if Muhammad is not a prophet. And as I said this morning, we fall if the Bible is not true. Christianity falls if Jesus is not God. So on the same token, we're going to be asking these questions concerning Islam. What exactly, or who exactly is Muhammad? And what is the Quran? Where did it come from? So let's go ahead. Now, just so you know, everything that I put up on the screen is on PowerPoint. I'll be following the PowerPoint. That will be available on the church website, so you can pull it down. Any of you can have access to this website. Don't feel you have to write or keep up with me. I go too fast. But let's go ahead and let's see what the Muslims claim. What they claim is, first of all, that Muhammad is the last and the greatest prophet. They would say that all the other prophets that came before, every one of them had problems. Therefore, God finally gave his final revelation to Muhammad. He is the greatest, the seal of all prophets. They would say that the Quran was his revelation, sent down only to him, and is the final and greatest revelation. So every other book that has gone ahead has been corrupted. And so when you look at these two books, they would say this book, though we call it a revelation, has been corrupted. This comes and seals it. It is the final revelation. If there's any contradiction between these two books, this one always is the one that abrogates the other. And that's found in two references in the Quran, in Surah Ayah 106 and Surah 16, Ayah 101. That which we give, mansuk, we give something better, nasik. Nasik abrogates the mansuk. So if there is any contradiction, this is mansuk, this is nasik. This is what destroys, according to Islam, anything that disagrees with the Quran. Therefore, Islam is the final religion, based on Muhammad's life and sayings, which is known as the Sunnah. Everything he did, everything he said is the Sunnah. He is the example for all peoples, in all places, in all times. And the Quran, his teachings. Now, conclusion, Islam is therefore completely dependent on both Muhammad and the Quran. So let's go ahead and investigate both Muhammad and the Quran and see if indeed the Muslims are correct. This is what Muslims have told us, and this is what I'm going to do now is just look at the classical account. What do Muslims say concerning Muhammad? First and foremost, they say that he was born in 570, that he then got a revelation from an angel in Jibril while he was in the Hira cave, just north of Mecca. Jibril comes to him while he's meditating and says, Akra, recite. His response was, Ma'akra, I cannot recite. He was squeezed, and then the angel repeats the same order. That happened 3 times. Finally, the angel lets him go. He goes back to Mecca, tells the story to his wife, Khadija. She then gives a test to him, and he passed that test, and then she goes and tells Waraka ibn Nawfal, her cousin, what had happened. And Waraka ibn Nawfal, then, the cousin of Khadija, who was a Christian, stipulates that truly he is a prophet. So it's one of the ironies of history that the person that actually gave the pronouncement as Muhammad is a prophet was a Christian. This is according to their account. In 610, then, those revelations started coming. And if you look at the Quran and you just basically put it in half. Now, this Quran, because it's in Arabic, it starts from the right and goes to the left. So for if you just split it in half, the first part of the Quran, or what we know as Medina, the second would be Mecca, the name of the 2 cities where he lived. So this would be Meccan, though it's the latter half of the Quran. This would be Medina, though it's the first half. Confusing, isn't it? Just turn it upside down and you get the right sequence. But it basically says that this part, the latter part, was revealed between 610 and 622, the first 12 years. In 621, he was woken up in the middle of the night, told to get on the back of the winged horse called Burak, there in Mecca, and he flies up to Jerusalem, where in Jerusalem, on the rock, where the Dome of the Rock is built, he then ascends the 7 heavens, meets Allah. Allah tells him to pray 50 times a day. He says, okay. He comes down 2 heavens to the 5th heaven. He meets Moses. Moses says, how many times did he tell you to pray? And he said, well, I was told to pray 50 times. He said, no, go back up and see if you can get it down. So he goes back up to the 7th heaven, gets it to 45, comes back to Moses. No, still too many. So he goes back and forth, bouncing between Allah and Moses, and brings it down from 45 to 40 to 35 to 30, down to 15, down to 10, finally to 5 prayers. Once he gets it to 5 prayers, then Moses, okay, that's enough. So it's Moses that actually stipulates how many prayers Muslims are to pray a day. Comes back down then to Jerusalem, gets back in the Burak, the winged horse, and flies back to Mecca. That's called the Miraj. That happens in 621. In 622 then, he then moves from Mecca up to Medina. That's called the Hijrah, the Exodus, with about 80, some say as many as 200 followers. And it is because of the problems he's having in Mecca. And then from 622 to 632, the last 10 years of his life, he receives the Medinan material, which is all the first part of the Quran, this material here. Now, there are some Meccan references in Medinan, and there's also some Medinan in the Mecca, but rule of thumb, that's Meccan, that's Medinan. Then from 630, he then goes into Mecca, and he takes over Mecca. He then controls all that central part of Arabia, called the Hijaz, and he dies in 632. Suddenly, some believe he was poisoned. From 632 to 634, Abu Bakr then takes over, rules for 2 years. He dies peacefully. From 634 to 644, Umar then takes over, and he is one of the ones that moves out and starts confronting and basically conquering many of the great cities of the Levant. He conquers Basra, he conquers Baghdad, he conquers Damascus, he conquers Jerusalem, and he conquers Cairo. So the 5 great cities of the Levant are now under Arab control. You notice I'm saying Arab control, not Muslim. You'll see why. That happens under the time of Umar. So by 642, the 5 great cities of the Levant are now under Arab control. 644 to 656, Uthman then takes over. And Uthman, the 3rd caliph, is important because it is he that actually compiles the Quran. It is he that's given that responsibility. He realizes that there were a number of different variations on the Quran. So he tells Zayd ibn Thabit, who is the secretary of Muhammad, to then rewrite the Quran and to correct it if it needs be. If there's any difficulty, then to use the Qurayshi dialect. And he's given 3 other men to help him, Zubair, Alas, and Harith, and the 4 of them rewrite the Quran and create what we know as the canon of the Quran. That's when the Quran was finally written down, 650, 18 years after Muhammad. The Quran had not been written down when Muhammad died. It was finally written down at the time of Uthman. Very important, 650. Keep that date in your head, 650, mid-7th century. He is then killed, and then Ali comes to power and rules only for 5 years. Ali is the adopted son of Muhammad. Really, for as far as the Shiites are concerned, the really only legitimate heir to Muhammad. Now that's known, that period, from 622 or 624 up until 661. That roughly 40-year period is known as the Rashidun period. That is the rightly guided kind of period. That is the beginning of Islam. That's the golden period of Islam. That's the classical account. Now, I'm just giving you bare bones, just a skeleton view. There could be many other things I could have added to the story, but that's what Muslims have been telling us for 1,400 years. Ooh, wait a minute. Not 1,400 years. I correct myself. 1,200 years. Why do I say that? Has anybody heard any other account? That's really what you've been taught, is it not? That's what you're taught in your schools. That's what all the Muslims are taught. And in every school around the world, this is the classical account. And there's been no reason not to doubt it, because there's no reason for us to assume that anything else has happened, or it could be any different. However, take a look and see, where is it we get that account from? Most of you probably don't know that everything we know about Muhammad himself, his life, is written down in what we call the Siratu Rasulullah, the biography, the life of the Prophet of God. The first man to write it down is Ibn Ishaq. And you can see up there on the, let me just get this thing working. I hope I can get it right so I don't blind myself. Here we go. That's Ibn Ishaq right there. Look at his date, 765. 765. The first biography we have of the Prophet is not written down until 765. He dies in 632. You see a problem. The first sayings we have from the Prophet, the sayings are the hadith. These are an enormous amount of material. 600,000 hadith were given to a man named Al-Bukhari. Al-Bukhari dies right here. Sorry, let's get this right. See his, I'm sorry, Al-Bukhari right here. 870. The first hadith are written down by him. Oh, let me back up. Hold on a minute. Did I say Ibn Ishaq is the first one to write down his biography? That's true, but we don't have any of Ibn Ishaq's material. We're dependent on this man right here, Ibn Hisham, 833. He was a student of Ibn Ishaq. He then takes what Ibn Ishaq has given him, and he throws out what he doesn't like and only retains what he likes. So the only thing we know about Muhammad comes from Ibn Hisham. His date is 833. Muhammad died in 632. You see the problem.
You also notice the problems with these New Age Bibles is the same way. They put out things they don't like, and they give us a Bible that's written by man, not by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. The inspiration of the Holy Spirit is changed to what a man says. So it's about the same thing.
The first sayings, these 600,000 akbars that are given to Al-Bukhari, he is then to whittle away that which he doesn't like. He takes it from 600,000 and retains only 7,397. So he throws out 98% of it, only retains 2% of it, and that 2% are the 9 volumes we have of Al-Bukhari. You can go up online and read them. But that is done in 870. That's 240 years later. Then if you want to talk about the tafsir, to understand this book, you need commentaries. And the commentaries are first written down by Al-Tabari. Al-Tabari is right there, 923. The first tafsir we have, written by Al-Tabari. Now, many other tafsirs that come after that, you have Baidawi, Zamakhshari, Suyuti, and many others. But the first one is Al-Tabari, 923, 10th century. So, put this in perspective. Everything we know about Muhammad, all his life, everything that happened, how Islam began over here, doesn't get written down till over here, 200 to 300 years later. Does that bother any of you? That should bother all of you. 200 years of what? Why did it take 200 years to write down his story? Why did it take over 200 years, 240 years to write down his sayings? And where did they get it from? Who are these people? Did they ever know Muhammad? Not one of them knew Muhammad. Al-Bukhari from Buharistan. Buharistan is in present-day Iraq. Al-Tabari from Tabaristan. That's in present-day Iran. These were people that lived hundreds of miles away and hundreds of years later. So what were they dependent on? Well, they were dependent on what we know as oral tradition.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at Jesus.
Uninspired.
Jesus, we know, has a biography written. In fact, not just one biography. We know of 4 biographies written about Jesus' life, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We know that 3 of them were written within 40 to 50 years of his life. We know that one, John, wrote much later, about 60 years. But we know that John was an eyewitness to everything he wrote, was he not? Matthew was also an eyewitness to everything he wrote. And Mark and Luke got it from the eyewitnesses. So you have 4 testimonies, 4 biographies of Jesus Christ, written either by those who were with Jesus or those who got it from those with Jesus. We know that all the New Testament was written by the first century. Can you see the difference? We're dependent on 30 to 40 years of oral tradition based on the very eyewitness example of the people that actually wrote it. Islam is dependent on 200 to 300 years of oral tradition. Can you see the problem? As a comparison, if we were to impose on the person of Jesus Christ what Islam is now finding out about their prophet, we would have nothing about Jesus written from within Christian sources until the 3rd century. Can you imagine us getting up here? Can you imagine Jack being able to speak and talk about Jesus authoritatively if everything he was dependent on only began to appear in the 3rd century? We would know who Jesus was. And why would we trust it? Yet this is something Muslims have not acknowledged. So the Western world, especially the secular scholars, are now asking 2 things. They're coming up to 2 suppositions. Islam, as we know it, they say, did not exist in the 7th century, but evolved over a period of 200 to 300 years. And the Quran probably was not revealed to one man in 22 years, but likely evolved over a period of 50 to 100 years. Their conclusion? The history of Islam, at least from the time of the Caliph Abdul Malik, he ruled from 685 to 705, and before is a later fabrication. Now that's a huge amount to say. But we're going to prove that now tonight. We're going to show you why that's so damaging and what we're now finding. Their concern is this. If so much of the history of early Islam was written down so late, then why did it take so long to write it all down? Were these people not literate? Yes, they were. Remember, by 642, they had taken over Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Cairo. Could people not read and write in Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Basra, Baghdad? Were these not great metropolises? They did not have a library in Alexandria that was destroyed by fire in the 5th century. Certainly these people could read and write. But more than that, they started moving right across North Africa. By 661, they had taken much of North Africa. They started moving the other direction towards India. And by the end of the 7th century, and by the time that Abdul Malik comes to power, they controlled all the way from Spain in the west to India in the east. Are you suggesting no one could read and write in any of those countries? And the Muslims themselves tell us that they could read and write. Because where in the world did this book come from? It's a book. It has words, letters, written down. According to Islamic tradition, it was written down by Zayd ibn Thabit. Who was Zayd ibn Thabit? He was a secretary of Muhammad. How can you be a secretary if you can't read and write? They themselves tell us that this book was written down in 650, under the time of Uthman. See, you can't make up that excuse, though Muslims are trying to make up that excuse now. You can't make up that excuse. And where did the biographers get their material from? If it was based on oral tradition, do we trust oral tradition? If I tell you something in your ear and you tell your wife and she tells another woman, by the time it gets to him, what I tell you and what he tells me are 2 different things. You ever played that game? It's a great game to play. We do it all the time in birthday parties. Chinese whispers, sorry Chinese, or telephone. And this is a game that shows exactly the problem with oral tradition, especially oral tradition, if it's based on someone that's important to your identity, as Muhammad would be. It gets embellished all the way. Therefore, they're asking, can it be trusted? Should we not instead go to the period these events took place? Should we not go back to the 7th century and see what we find? So, what are they finding? Well, let's take a look at that map real quickly. You can see right here, by the time 661, Islam had, did I say Islam? Forgive me. The Arabs had already moved out from this part of the world over into this part of the world, all the way up into here. All that land was under their jurisdiction. I'm losing my... Do we have another one of these? I just think I ruined this one. Here we go. There we go, back again. This area all the way to that area was under their jurisdiction. So we're not talking about a people that were destitute. We're not talking about a people that were persecuted. We're not talking about people that were oppressed like Christianity was to begin with. Remember, Christianity for the first 300 years were underground. They were persecuted. Our scriptures were destroyed. The Diocletian edict in 300 destroyed many of our manuscripts. Here we go. Let me back again. This not talking a beat about people that were persecuted. Tell us that this book was written down in 650 under the time of Uthman. Tell us that this book was written down in 650 here, and you tell your wife, and she tells another woman. By the time it gets to him, what I tell you and what he tells me are two different things. You ever played that game? It's a great game to play. We do it all the time at birthday parties. Chinese whispers. Sorry, Chinese. Or telephone. And this is a game that shows exactly the problem with oral tradition, especially oral tradition, if it's based on someone that's important to your identity, as Muhammad would be. It gets embellished all the way. Therefore, they're asking, can it be trusted? Should we not instead go to the period these events took place? Should we not go back to the 7th century and see what we find? So, what are they finding? Well, let's take a look at that map real quickly. You can see right here, by the time 661, Islam had, did I say Islam? Forgive me. The Arabs had already moved out from this part of the world over into this part of the world, all the way up into here. All that land was under their jurisdiction. I'm losing my... Do we have another one of these? I just think I ruined this one. Here we go. There we back again. This area, all the way to that area, was under their jurisdiction. So we're not talking about a people that were destitute. We're not talking about a people that were persecuted. We're not talking about people that were oppressed like Christianity was to begin with. Remember, Christianity for the first 300 years were underground. They were persecuted. Our scriptures were destroyed. The Diocletian edict in 300 destroyed many of our manuscripts. Islam can't make that excuse. They control this whole swath of land. They control these cities. There's no way in the world that any of these Qurans should have been destroyed or lost or burnt. So there's a whole new school now that's asking some disturbing questions. Men like Dr. John Wansborough, head of department at School of Oriental and African Studies, who wrote 2 books in the 1970s, Quranic Studies and Sectarian Milieu. These 2 books that were written in the 1970s blew open this whole notion that Islam began with a man named Muhammad. Dr. Hawting, who I studied there at the School of Oriental and African Studies in the 1990s, who has taken much of John Wansborough's material and has put it down to layman's terminology so we can understand it. Dr. Patricia Corona, who was my supervisor when I began my doctorate there in Cambridge University. Dr. Patricia Corona from Denmark, she can read and write 15 languages, all archaic languages. How many of you can read and write 15 languages? Dr. Andrew Rippon from Calgary University in Canada.
Yeah, King James translator's good. Several of them that good.
Has probably one of the best books written on how to understand this historical material that you can read. Dr. Robert Hoyland. Dr. Hoyland, who is out of Oxford University. He was my second supervisor when I began. He reads and writes 18 languages. These are linguists. These are people that are going back to the original documents. That's why they're so dangerous. Dr. Yehuda Nebo, out of the University of Jerusalem, who's probably done the best work on looking at the oldest Islamic, or what we know as Arabic inscriptions. And he's probably done a devastating work we'll talk about a little bit more later concerning what we now know about Muhammad. And then from the German school, Dr. Luning, Dr. Prin, Dr. von Hofmer, Dr. Oling, from Saarland University in Saarbrücken have probably done the best work on the Islamic or the Quranic manuscripts, and we're going to introduce some of their material tonight. But there have been 2 books and 1 documentary which are paving the way. And these are books you can read. The first one was written by Dr. Tom Holland. Dr. Tom Holland was a friend, still is. He and I went and had dinner back in 2006. I had just done a documentary with him on St. Paul. I told him at dinner afterwards that I'm not really an expert on St. Paul, but that he, as a historian, needs to change gears. Now, this man has written 3 bestsellers in Britain. He's considered to be one of our most celebrated historians in Britain today. He wrote Rubicon, which is the fall of the Roman Empire. He wrote Millennium, the fall of the Byzantine Empire. And he wrote Persian Fire, the fall of the Persian Empire. So I turned to him and I said, hold it, stop and think. Oh, Tom, these empires fell in the 7th century. What came next? He said, well, Islam, of course. I said, exactly. You're the best equipped to write the next chapter. He said, well, what should I do? What is you're talking about? I said, well, just write this down. So I gave 10 historical challenges in 2006. He wrote them down quickly, and that's the last I heard of Dr. Tom Holland until last year, 2012. Someone phoned me and said, have you looked at the Sunday Times? There on the cover of the Sunday Times was that book up there on the right.
So that's just a little bit of a preview of what they were talking about as far as Quran. And it's just something that I haven't really looked into before, but it just makes all the sense in the world. Of course, Quran is it's always the Bible of the Muslims. It's the Hadith, things of that nature. So it's all the more important that we have the truth, God's word, and not lies, because it's easy to be deceived by those things that aren't the truth. And if you're deceived, then you're easily deceiving others. As we're seeing here in 2 Timothy chapter 3:13, it says this: but evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. And unfortunately, there are a lot of books out there, and they have no eyewitness accounts. They have no collateral witnesses. They have no one passing down the information from one person to another based on the eyewitness accounts that they had, like the John the Apostle had with the Lord himself, telling others who write it down. And so with the Quran, you had years and years and years. They never had no eyewitness account of Muhammad. It only went by conjecture and hearsay, what have you. And hundreds of years later, a couple hundred years later, that's when it really got written down. So there's no eyewitness accounts, So anyway, just want to share that with you, and I'm going to go to bed. It's 4:23. I'm going to go to bed. Anyway, hope you enjoy that video. And it's interesting facts there. I might go ahead later. I'm really asleep right now. I'll put a link down there below later on. But anyway, I hope you enjoy it. And I hope it kind of stirs you up to seeing the importance of the Word of God, God's Holy Bible, Authorized Version, and the importance of which Bibles are books of lies and which ones are truth. Anyway, with that being said, I will go to bed. Hope you have a great night. God bless. All right. See you.